Hello all. This chapter of the book comprehensively discusses basic characteristics of the Ottoman Empire in terms of economic and administrative system. It also includes discussions concerning to reformation attempts and initial periods of the modern Turkey and its revolutionary changes. During the chapter, we will briefly deal with these topics in historical order. The issue that we discuss are the basic characteristics of the economic and administrative systems of the Ottoman Empire, the process of reform in the Ottoman Empire and Ottoman modernization process, movements of thoughts in the empire during the 19th century, and the establishment of the modern Turkey and Republican period, as well as revolutions of the Republican period. Okay, let's start with the basic characteristics of the economic and administrative system of the Ottoman Empire. Ottoman state had a centralized structure that was represented by the Sultan himself. In this centralized system, all land was essentially the property of the Sultan, and the management of the property was administered by Sultan's household troops that we call Kapıkulu. The ruling class, consisting of the timar holders and ulema, who were the religious scholars, carried out some authorities of the Sultan as well. The Reaya, that was the group that engaged in production in the rural and the urban areas, was divided in itself into Muslim and non-Muslim nations. Reaya was the main tie to the state, and it collected the tax revenues. All kinds of the relations between the ruling class and the Reaya were strictly defined and occasionally inspected by the Sultan's own administrative power. Ottoman system of land ownership was arranged to prevent the emergence of the aristocratic structure. This is mainly because such a structure would have been encouraging even the state treasury. The concepts of ownership itself is disconnected from the land ownership, where the agricultural production was actualized. Looking at the administrative system of the empire, Ottoman Empire, we can tell that the patrimonialism was the basic characteristic of the Ottoman Empire's administrative system. The fundamental political philosophy adopted by the patrimonial state gains its strength from a particular form of defense mechanism. In this system, all means were used to reproduce the order, the terms of the established order, which means the division in the society between ones who are ruled and the ones who are ruling, needed to be reproduced. On the other hand, there were also some forms of the local authorities in the administrative system of the Ottoman Empire, such as ayans, who acknowledged the Ottoman rule and to fulfill the obligations in terms of the tax payments and military services. In the 16th century, the Ottoman financial system had started to fluctuate and threatened by the Western capitalism, which had already started to be rapidly evolving global system at that time. From the second half of the 16th century onwards, the military, political, and economic developments came together, and the Depression era that have lasted 5 centuries began. The most significant outcome of the financial depression and the other developments that emerged in the economy was the dissolution of the Timar system. In relation to the results of the successive military defeats, the Ottoman administrators became aware of a danger that they faced until the 17th century. Thus, Ottoman sultans thought they could deal with the challenge of the West by making fragmentary reforms. And all of those fragmentary reforms were actualized, especially within the military structure. However, the problem in the long run was not in a sense associated with the military itself, but more of structural questions. Consequently, by the end of the 18th century, the idea that the Westernization consisted of importing luxury goods for the upper class was abandoned. Instead of this, the notion that the real Westernization means reconstructing the society and building a new state on the basis that was adopted. We can argue that the Ottoman modernization process covers a period of approximately 200 years until the revolution at the beginning of the 20th century. This is quite a long process, and it can be classified under certain headings like Third Selim period, reforms of the Second Mahmud, the era of the Tanzimat, the Reform Edict of the 1856, the first constitutional period and the Young Ottomans, and the second constitutional period and the Young Turks. We can approach the last century of the Ottoman Empire within the frame of three different consolidation strategies. In this context, the Tanzimat period can be identified with the strategy of Ottomanism, and the Abdülhamid period can be identified with Islamism or Pan-Islamism, and lastly, the period of Ittihat ve Terakki can be identified with the strategy of Turkism or Pan-Turkism. Looking at the idea of Ottomanism, we can see that it was an ideology that emerged with the Tanzimat to prevent the independence of various ethnic groups in the empire, particularly in Balkans. This was attempted by obtaining support from the Western states. Also, this ideology, which was Ottomanism, has tried to bring forward a sense of super identity over all ethnic groups. Thus, we can say that it was seen as a multi-ethnic and multi-religious vision developed against the dissolution of the empire. Islamist thought, on the other hand, advocate that all Muslims must unite around the second Abdülhamid, and they suggested that if the Islam is properly applied, then the Ottoman Empire could catch the developments that experienced by the West during last 200 years. According to the Islamists, the Muslims in the empire had to be both united in thoughts and politics. All the factors that could prevent this unity, such a unity, had to be destroyed. After the Balkan Wars, the inability of the Ottomanism and the Islamism movements to prevent the loss of land led to the emergence of the Turkish nationalism as an idea. This idea was called Turkism and aimed to hold the nation together under the umbrella of Turkishness. Intellectuals of the Turkism argued that the Turkish nation could survive only through the preservation of the moral and cultural values of of Turkishness. The modernization efforts that were carried out through the policies of Ottomanism, Islamism, and Turkism were not able to save the empire, apparently. What remained was a dismantled empire for which the Unionists were held responsible. Besides, people felt themselves tired of war that continued for centuries in the last period of the Ottoman Empire. Thus, following to the National Independence War, that actually inspired quite a number of nations around the entire world, under the commander of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk and his military commanders. The foundations of today's modern Turkey were developed. After the occupation, forces were removed from the country and the hegemony of the caliphate was restricted. The national movements under the leadership of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk acquired the power to achieve their own modernizing objectives. Some economic, social, and intellectual, as well as some cultural reforms have been carried out during the transition from the empire to the republic in Turkey, in early stages of Turkey. Among this, we can point out declaration of the republic, abolition of the sultanate system and caliphate, closing down all religious dervish lodges and adaptations of the Turkish civil code, adaptations of new Turkish alphabet, and entitlement of women with the right to elect and be elected, and so forth. When we look at the first chapter of our book, Social Structure of Turkey, Volume 1, we can see a basic but not superficial introduction to the historical background of modern Turkey. The chapter aimed to shed a light on the past of the modern Turkey with the purpose of providing a background information of today's society. In this context, the chapter briefly discusses basic characteristics of the economic and administrative system of the Ottoman Empire. It explains the reform process in the Ottoman Empire. Following this, it focuses on the Ottoman modernization process and the movements of thought in the 19th century. And lastly, it pay attention and aim to enlighten you concerning establishment of the modern Turkey and the revolutions that the modern Turkey achieved. Thank you.